Hello, everybody. I'll get to an intro slide in a second here. I'm going to be talking about capturing and evaluating teams in Microsoft 365 Analytics. So, everything you've heard so far today from Caruana, from Heather, awesome from an adoption driving point of view. It's important also to understand how those adoption plans are working and how your users are actually using the 365 stack. So let me start with a quick intro on myself. Peter Carson here, president of Envision IT. We're a Microsoft Gold partner located in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, up in Canada. So Eastern time here, managed to grab a quick bite to eat there in the 8-minute break. Thank you, Russ. And I've got all my contact information in here. As Russ mentioned, the slides are going to be shared, the recording is going to be shared, so you can grab all my contact info from there. So we've got about half an hour here today. Fair bit we're going to go through. It looks like a short agenda, but I'm trying to keep slides to a minimum. So I'm going to start with just a little overview on ways of working. There's obviously a lot of choice in the Microsoft ecosystem of different tools that you can use. And we've been working on something we call our maturity model of how people are using Microsoft 365 and understanding as they start to adopt new tools. People have been thrown into the deep end with Teams, with COVID, but are they really adopting it, or are they just using it more for a chat and meeting type of tool? So how do you measure that? How do you drive the behaviors and really get people to leverage the full power of the tools from there? So we'll dig into the Microsoft 365 analytics. There's a number of different tools from Microsoft on that side that we'll look at. And we'll actually look at a third-party tool called Tygraph. Not part of our company. I'm not compensated by them for this plug, but a great tool from an analytics point of view that I think is worth mentioning from that point of view. This slide's a little tiny. We need to dress this one up a bit. And Caruana mentioned, she's not a fan of the what to use when concept. And here we're not providing guidance on what to use when. It's really more of what are the choices. What are the different things that you can use? And we haven't even included all the options in here. We don't have Yammer in here. We don't have Skype for Business. We've really focused in on what we as an organization tend to focus on from an Outlook Teams communication point of view. I mean, that's typically how you send and receive information. But if you're going to chat, that's probably going to be in Teams. If you're going to store files, that might be in SharePoint or OneDrive. You might think that you're doing it in Teams, even though, if you realize under the hood, everything Teams, document focus, and files focus is actually happening in SharePoint and OneDrive from there. Best practices. Heather mentioned she's a big fan of OneNote. I'm a huge fan of that as well. I really like to see OneNote used extensively through there. So I won't go through all the options in here, but it's really, laying out the different tools. And part of what we're going to talk about is understanding the choices that people make and how they use those different tools. So I'm going to start with, just some critical rules of engagement that we often use with our clients when we're having discussions around adoption, around teams, and things you want to be explaining to people. This is not by any stretch an all-encompassing list. It's sort of a top 5 quick list from there. And the first is that your activity feed in your teams really becomes your new inbox. And I've really seen this transition happening for us. I mean, we've been using Teams for a couple of years now. We did the final move away from Skype for Business Voice to Teams Voice about 2 years ago. And my inbox volume, I'll show you in a minute, is still a bit out of control, but it's all external. It's not internal. And absolutely my activity feed in Teams is where I live from that point of view. And setting some parameters around how people use chat versus conversations in Teams channels and how they use reactions. We've got sort of some standard practices, like we do a like response when we've been mentioned on a Teams message, and that means I've seen your message, but I haven't necessarily taken action on it. So if I get a message from a staff member saying, hey, I'd like to take the next 6 months off on paid vacation, I can like that to say, hey, I've noticed that, but it doesn't mean you're approved and I'll see you in 6 months' time. But that acknowledgement idea is really important from that point of view. And this was a point that Heather made. Teams really does become the launch pad for all your Office 365, Microsoft 365 applications. As we saw from the comments during Heather's talk, people use a lot of different apps and they task switch between a lot of different apps. And I'm guilty of that myself. My taskbar is actually looking pretty clean in Windows 10 right now because I've cleared all of those off for this talk. But normally I would have a lot of different apps running all at the same time in there, and I'm constantly task switching between those different things. So the more that you can make Teams your home and the place that you work, the better from that point of view. Outlook in the past, and for many people still, is the place you start and end your day. You look at your inbox, you look at your calendar. Really, that becomes Teams for a lot of people from there. So let's talk about some scenarios, and this is really coming back to my concept of maturity and saying, okay, how do people communicate in your organization? Typically people are very email centric and have been for years, and this Teams world is for a lot of people a new world that they've been thrown into for the most part since last March when COVID struck and a lot of us ended up remote knowledge workers from there. But maybe SMS text messaging is part of your organizational culture, and or you've transitioned to Teams, but it's just at the individual chat level. Maybe you haven't evolved that to formalizing your information architecture of how your teams and your channels are organized, and how that works from a channel conversation point of view. So we kind of see this as a hierarchy of maturity, starting at very email centric based, moving down into ultimately channel conversations with teams from a more mature perspective. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but you do want to encourage behavior and drive patterns from there. One of the things that we'll see in analytics later is this idea of working out loud, and I'm a big fan of this idea that by moving people all the way down to the channel conversation level, there is this concept that, yes, I may have mentioned a couple of people that are pertinent on this conversation, but it may be part of a team that a broader group has access to. And that's the concept of working out loud, to say, we're not going to lock all that knowledge up in private email conversations or private individual or group chats. We're going to make it available to the broader organization. That doesn't have to mean the whole organization. It can mean the context of that team. Maybe it's your senior leadership team or your management team, but not everybody needs to be CC'd on it. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to know the existence of that conversation. And this becomes important, particularly as you get to things like running projects in your organization and cross-functional teams and such. Those teams don't tend to be static. If you've got a long-lived project that maybe is going to take a year to go to completion, people are going to go out, people are going to come back in. Having that in there as a channel conversation becomes a historical record, and as new team members join, they're not facing a blank inbox and no past knowledge of what's been going on the project. They're able to see that through that conversational history. They can search it through the Microsoft search and that whole perspective. Question on where does Yammer fit in? Good question. I mean, I should have set the stage in terms of the types of organizations that we work with. It tends to be from the sort of 100 people in the organization to maybe a couple of thousand people in the organization, and those size of organizations, I don't necessarily see the need for both Teams and Yammer. There's always this question of, should we have Yammer? Should we have Teams? They do have strengths that are unique to each of them. Yammer is great from that crowdsourcing ideation side of things. But in our sizes of organizations that we work with, we find that the all company channels, the organizational groups do well from that point of view. So I'm not a Yammer hater. We've done a lot of work with Yammer in the past. Just for our style of organizations, that doesn't fit in from that perspective. Having said that, if that is part of your play in here, absolutely you want to make it part of that. And the same applies from a documents point of view. In a lot of organizations still, people use their My Documents, and it's kind of scary if IT hasn't grabbed their local My Documents on their notebook and mapped it to their OneDrive, because those files literally exist just on that hard drive. And if that person loses that OneNote or that notebook, they've lost all that knowledge. So just moving those people into the OneDrive world and say let's have cloud backup and sharing as part of that is a big step forward from there. And then you see kind of the same thing from a file shares to a team sites. A lot of folks have depended on file shares for a long time. There's often decades worth of historical documents in there. It's often a quagmire. I mean, there's not uncommon to see 10, 20 levels of folders deep on the file shares, and nobody can find anything in there. That's obviously a challenge. The other big challenge when you get into that complexity is that things often exist in multiple places, and you have duplicate documents and no single version of the truth. Moving that to a shared SharePoint underneath Teams perspective, obviously a much better way from that perspective. A question there on can docs in Teams be recovered? So remember when you save a document into Teams, it's in the Files tab, you're actually saving it into SharePoint Online. So all of the retention history, all the backup, everything that applies from that point of view applies in Teams as well. And there's some neat features that started in OneDrive that are coming into SharePoint Online that I can actually dial back time. So, heaven forbid you get a victim of a ransomware attack and all your documents get encrypted, you can actually go back and dial back your OneDrive to say I need it as of yesterday at 3 p.m. before that virus hit me, and you can actually self-serve out of there from there. So there's a lot of interesting things from that perspective. Now, having said that,
hey
sorry,
Peter,
Russ.
sorry to jump in, but I lost your screen share.
Oh, that's odd.
I'm not sure if it's just me or if it's everyone.
It is saying that it's still sharing, but let me stop sharing and start that again just to make sure. Oh, a couple comments saying it's just you, Russ, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But
All right,
I am
sorry.
resharing, so we should be good there. So yeah, that's from a document scenario point of view. And then from a meetings perspective, everybody's, I'm pretty sure, well versed in participating in running Teams meetings. I mean, this particular one, we're not recording it directly through the Teams meeting itself. We're actually live streaming this session out through LinkedIn and Facebook, and recording it through that way. But do people typically share their webcams? Do they share their screens? Are they doing recordings? Are they aware of how that wires into Stream? And even things like OneNote, the fact that there's some nice integrations from OneNote into your calendar that you can grab the meeting details right from Exchange, pull all that into your OneNote, and keep your meeting notes from there. I mean, one of the things that we've adopted as a pattern at Envision IT is that when we do meetings, we often tend to record those. We do encourage webcam sharing. It does provide a nice feel from that point of view. There's a better connection from that point of view. We also often do screen recordings. And what we do is we then tag those recordings in Stream so that they show up in the channel in Teams, and it makes it easier to come back later and say, okay, in that project, where's all that recording data for that? So just some patterns and practices from an adoption point of view across the conversational side of it, across the document side of it, and across the meeting side of it. I'm going to chat this link out to the group here. Actually, I've got it open in my browser here. That might work better. And I'm going to make it available for everybody to multitask. I'm sure people are familiar with multitasking in meetings, given where we are now in the home working. But basically, this is a quick Microsoft Forms staff survey that we've put together. And I'll start to take you through a bit of what this looks like. It basically asks you a few questions. You don't need to provide your name or your email. If you're interested in getting some follow-on, because we are going to be publishing some Power BI reports and some additional information around here, feel free to put it in, but you can ignore, there's nothing required on this survey. And we're going to be publishing this as a template as well, so you could use it as a starting point. I'm a big fan of Microsoft Forms. It makes it really easy to create things like this to send out to your staff. And what we're going to talk about here is, what do you want to do from a self-assessment point and survey point of view? And then what do you want to do from a back-end analytics perspective? So, do you use Microsoft 365? Which of these products do you use? And we specifically didn't, provide a lot of detail as to what the answers meant on these particular things, because as we get deeper into, this one here, to sort of categorize how you do those different types of conversational styles, it's okay if people don't know what a Teams channel conversation is. They can answer not sure on that, because that says something right into it of itself through there. And then the same thing from a documents point of view and how you collaborate. What do you do in a meeting? So the same things I just took you through in the slide deck, we're capturing here from an analytics point of view. And one of the things we're going to be doing is we've made this form publicly available so anybody can come and try it, not just from this session here. And we're going to feed that into a Power BI dashboard so we can anonymize it and provide those results out. So you can kind of get a sense of, these were your answers. We won't be able to show how you relate to that because it won't be authenticated, but you can see the general roll up of what that looks like from there. So I'll come back to the results in a little bit from here. Feel free to take a minute as I'm talking and go through and answer that. And I'll do a quick share of what the results look like from that survey. Okay. So what about from an analytics point of view? If we want to go into the back end and say, okay, what am I able to extract out of 365 myself? Now, a bunch of the stuff that I'm going to show you here does require either tenant global admin or administrator rights in this particular product, like Teams admin rights. So you may not have the ability to get this in your organization. We're going to share all the slides and all the details around this, so you'll know maybe what to ask your administrators within your organization. Say, hey, I'm driving adoption. I want to see some of this data and look at what this looks like. So I'm going to flip back over to my browser. Caruana mentioned this, the idea of a productivity score. And what Microsoft has done is they've taken a number of measures within your organization and basically ranked you and said, okay, what's your score and how do you compare to peer organizations? So not everybody that uses Microsoft 365, but like-sized organizations. And to give some context to what we're seeing here, this is our live tenant. We have a lot of tenants. We have demo tenants and development tenants. This is actually our real Envision IT tenant. Now, we're a development organization. We're not a big company. We're 18 people. We have a bunch of made-up accounts in there and such as well. We can't easily take those people out here, so we do see some skew. Like here, I'm seeing that, from a people experience point of view, we're doing great from a communications point of view, but if I drill into that, we'll see that, hey, only 58% of the people in our org use 2 or more modes of communication. That actually isn't true. That 58% represents the 18 active people that are actually working. We're all in Outlook, we're all in Teams. We're definitely using 2 or more modes to communicate from there. But it also shows a gray chart there that says, okay, that's your peer benchmark and where are you rating from that perspective. So you can see in different contexts, communication we're doing quite well. Meetings we're slightly above peer, which is kind of expected. I mean, everybody's doing online meetings from that perspective. We're big on content collaboration. The history of our organization is as a SharePoint consultancy. So we're all about team sites and document collaboration and modern collaboration. So we're all over that from that point of view. From a people and a technology point of view, we're doing really well on the people experience. I actually dug into this one as to why we're lagging a bit on the technology experience. It's actually because of our internet connectivity, and we haven't had a single staff person in the office for the last 7 months since the March close down. So everybody's using home internet. And I've done a bunch of polls with staff to understand, what's their home working environment? Do they need better equipment or desks or internet or anything else? But I guess we're still lagging a little bit from that point of view. But it's very interesting to see how you're rating as an organization and things you can do to move that up from there. So that's one part of it. It's just the productivity score. The other part is on the usage to say, okay, how are you actually using Microsoft 365? And this is just showing active users over time. And we're seeing sort of a week by week dip as unfortunately we're not going to zero over the weekends, which actually is a bad thing. We do want staff to disconnect. I agree with Caruana that, having that personal time and removing yourself from work while it's harder in the remote work world is super important. I don't practice what I preach. My personal work-life balance is pretty out of whack right now, but it is important to me to know that my staff are trying to work that way as well. So seeing that usage is important from that point of view. And seeing who's using which activities in here, how much email activity are we doing, sent and received versus Teams activity, and seeing here things like channel messages versus chat messages. So, we are a strong proponent of the working out loud, but the reality is that, we're still doing 5-6 times as many chat messages as we are channel conversations. And part of that's corporate culture, and part of it is some things just belong in chat from that point of view. So working through from that perspective. Calls and meetings that we have, you'll notice we actually do less calling. I'm actually wondering whether we need Teams voice calling for all of our staff, because almost everything goes through meetings. I can't remember the last time I actually dialed a phone number in through Teams and called somebody that way. And how are we doing from a OneDrive and a SharePoint Office activations point of view? So a lot of data here. You do need to be an Office 365 Global admin to get into the admin center to see this data, but you could certainly have an administrator, pick the period that's appropriate that you want to see, snapshot that for you and provide that to you if you don't have access yourself. Now, the caveat is that the maximum that you can have this available is for 180 days. So Microsoft doesn't make this available forever. It would be up to you to harvest this data out and archive it if you wanted it for future reference from that point of view. Okay, so that's on the all up Microsoft 365 side. I can dig into the Teams side as well, and I can see some usage reporting in here to go a little deeper into the Teams itself side. Personally, I don't find myself digging into this side too much. What I'm going to do now is just flip back to the PowerPoint for a second. So we've talked about the productivity score and the main admin side of it. What I want to get into now is the Microsoft 365 usage analytics. So this is basically a Power BI connector that you deploy into your environment, and it starts to pull in that analytics data for you. So let me flip over to my Power BI. So this is my lineage view in Power BI that shows me the different data sources that I've got. So this OData source that's going back to reports.office.com, this is the endpoint that Microsoft is providing to get your analytics data out. And when you install the usage analytics into your Power BI service, you get this workspace and this report coming out from that. I've customized, so I'm geeking out on Power BI. I love it, and I'm show you some customizations that we've done. But let me first just go into the out-of-the-box reporting that we have through there. So this is similar to what we were seeing in the admin toolkit. The nice thing here is that if you have Power BI licensing for your organization, it doesn't have to be organization-wide. Basically, whoever publishes this report, whoever has the admin rights to set it up and publish it, and then whoever wants to consume it, whatever that group of people is, needs to have a Power BI Pro license for that. You could have a Power BI enterprise for your whole organization, then everybody would be able to look at it from that perspective. But that gives you a sense of how you license and make this available. So that lights this up for people that aren't administrators to start to get access to this data. So we can start to see things like, adoption, percentage of users, usage, mobility, who's using it through the web, who's using it through mobile devices, what does that look like across the different product workloads from there. So I can drill down into, Exchange, into SharePoint. I don't see Teams on here specifically. If I get down into things like the user activity, I will see some more detail through there. So I can come into a Teams tab here and start to understand what are my active teams and departments, my user activity, channel messages versus chat messages, some of those things that we were seeing on the other side we have available to us through here as well. But let me come back to the workspace. And let's go into the customized version. So I talked about our maturity model. So what I thought was, how do we take some of the data that Microsoft's providing to us and morph it into the questions that we're looking to get answered through here. So some of the things that we're looking at is understanding Teams usage by staff. So what this is showing me here is for each of our named people in our organization, how are they interacting with Teams? So the light blue is showing us channel messages, the dark blue is showing us one-to-one or group chats, and the orange is showing Teams calls or meetings that they're participating in through there. So we can quickly see, what's the ratio of channel conversations versus chat, who's where on that spectrum, and what does that look like. And we can also slice and dice that and say, okay, let's look at it from department and understand our different departments within our organization. In addition to a consulting company, we are a products independent software vendor as well. We've got a number of products available. So we have a products department, our consulting, our technical development group, sales and marketing, finance administration. Obviously, as we get down in here, there's less people involved in those departments, so less activity going on through there. But what's important also is just the spectrum of relationship between those and what those look like. And we've done the same thing from a SharePoint Online point of view as well to understand what that looks like. What are all the activities going on in those various different departments from a files and document perspective. So we didn't need to do any additional data harvesting. It's using the data source and the data set that Microsoft already provided. It's just a matter of firing up Power BI Desktop, connecting to that data set, and then starting to build your own visualizations from there. So if you're a Power BI person, you're comfortable with that, it's not too hard to extend what Microsoft has done from that point of view. Okay, let's come back to our slide deck here. So that's the Power BI side of things. Now you can go further. You can actually use things like Azure Automation, PowerShell, and actually harvest data from the Graph API. The question came up earlier when Heather was showing the WhoBot and exploring people and documents that they're working on and such. All that data is stored in the Graph API. So every signal, every action that you're taking in 365 is getting recorded and is available through the Graph API. And you can harvest that out. You could build your own data model inside of Power BI. You could even build a SQL data warehouse to manage that information. So you've got a lot of tools available to you. It just gets to be more technical work to actually build that out from that perspective. And that's really what Tygraph. I mentioned Tygraph is a third-party product. That's what their product is all about. So they've built an entire data warehouse, and they basically reach into all the various different graph endpoints across different products, and harvest all that data out for you. And basically, when you become a subscriber to Tygraph, their SaaS solution connects to your tenant. They have segregation, so everybody's data warehouse is their own dedicated Azure SQL database. So there's no worry about data leakage between clients, and then use your own Power BI to then access those reports. So I've got that lit up on our tenant. Let me flip over to that here. So there's a number of apps that you can install. They've got different flavors to our product, or to their product. They've got Tygraph Pulse, which is kind of an all-up view across. Doesn't get as deep down into the individual products. And then they've got apps for individual items like OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, and Yammer. You can buy individual products, or you can buy an enterprise license that has all of those rolled together. But let's start with the Pulse. That's kind of the high-level view of what that looks like. And much like the productivity score that Microsoft has, there's a concept of a digital transformation score in Tygraph. And it's looking at same concepts as Microsoft, maybe slightly different rules and analytics as to how it's pulling it together. It's understanding how people are using the full Microsoft suite and ranking it out from there. It looks like we fell off a cliff here. We didn't actually. It's just that we're only partway through the month of November, so we don't see those analytics. So we're actually trending up nicely from a transformation score point of view, which is nice to see. And I can start to drill down in individual reports from here. So I can say, okay, even though email may not be what we're trying to drive, we might try to drive email volume down. It's interesting to see what does that look like. I can look at myself at the top of this list here and say, okay, in the last 6 months, I received 18,000 emails, which is just craziness. It's out of control. I mean, that's what does that work out to? 3,000 a month, 100 emails a day, 7 days a week. So poor Amanda is my assistant. She's not in a much better boat than I am from that point of view. And then it kind of goes down from there into more manageable levels. Driving those numbers down, at least from an internal point of view, Tygraph doesn't pull it out right now, but just like I showed you in the out of the box Power BI reporting that Microsoft provides, I mean, you can build your own dashboards on top of Tygraph as well. So if you say, well, I'm interested in internal versus external email as a metric, and my goal is to drive internal email down and move that over to channel conversations on Teams, and recognize that external conversations are probably going to stay as email, you can start to build a dashboard that measures that. Because it's important to see how that trends over time and what that's looking like. Because if we come over to Teams and we say, okay, well, how are we doing on the Teams side of things? Well, if we look at chat messages versus private messages versus meetings and calls, I mean, they've got this idea of working out loud score here that's explicitly looking at the percentage of conversations that are happening in channels versus the ones that are happening in individual chats. And okay, yes, I'm a little fanatical maybe about working out loud. I'm an outlier from that point of view. But if we look into the sort of the deeper view of Teams usage, sorry, I'm brain farting on where I see that in here, by users, we would actually see that level of detail in there. Actually, I think it's on the Tygraph for Teams side of it. I'll have to flip over to that. And we can do the same thing on Yammer, on SharePoint, on your whole stack across that, and understand organizationally how you're looking at from that perspective. One of the questions while Carianna was speaking was, how do we drive adoption across different devices? Looking at your team's device usage is a great way to see that. I mean, we're half Windows, which isn't surprising. We're a Microsoft shop. But we've got iOS and Android as a pretty significant portion of that. Web is a piece of that, and we've got a little bit of Mac OS in there as well. So we've got to have a pretty good representation of all platforms from that perspective. So that gives us a sense on that side. So let's actually pause for a minute here. What I'd like to do is come back to the Microsoft Forms. So let's have a look at that. So if I pull out of this one here, so I need to get in my full Forms interface. Oh, looks like we haven't got responses to that just yet. Or did I share the wrong one out? I'm not sure. Okay, I'll have to circle back with people on that side because it looks like I'm not getting the results unless they ended up in the wrong one over here. Okay. I mean, this is just a bit of an overview, a little deeper onto the Tygraph side. I won't spend a whole lot of time because I don't want it to be salesy, but just sort of what you get out of the box, what you get through the Tygraph product today, and what's planned from a future roadmap point of view. So we're going to be sharing the slides out. Absolutely, we can go from there. Oh, somebody just commented, yes, we have. Is it the 34 one? Well, let's take a wing and see what we've got in here. So maybe I shared the wrong one out here. I think this still looks like the older one here. I mean, this gives you a sense. Let's take a minute, anyways, to go through this of what sort of data you get back from that form survey, so you can get a sense of which products people are using. Both Heather and I are big OneNote fans, so who's using OneNote through here. You can see in your organization who's using Teams versus SharePoint versus Outlook and such from that point of view. And then this is an interesting visualization here. Gives us a sense of where we at on the spectrum from each of those items through there. How many people are using email? Everybody basically. But when we get into Teams individual chat versus group versus channel conversations, we start to get some not sure and never down at the bottom on that, and at mentions and Teams reactions, maybe a little less so as well. So I mean, ideally you want to see the bottom ones here starting to push over to the right if you were to repeat this process later from that perspective. And then, where do you currently store your documents? Do you store them on your My Documents? Do you still use file shares? Do you use your OneDrive? Do you use your team sites from there? And this one we didn't cover, but it's an important one to measure as well. Just how are you sharing and collaborating on documents internally? People were so ingrained to just attaching documents to an email and sending it. Really, you should be sending a link to a OneDrive or to a SharePoint team sites. In an ideal world, I love co-authoring. We do a lot of RFP responses and things like that, where we've got multiple people working on documents. Being able to co-author on those is a lifesaver from that point of view. And then what do you do from an online meetings point of view? Obviously joining it for pretty much everybody, but where do you stand on the spectrum in terms of sharing your webcam, sharing your screen, recording it, and understanding how that fits into stream from that point of view? So we don't have the template available just now, but I will post that up onto the site shortly as well. If not by the end of this week, then early next week, and we can share that out to the group as well. So I think that was it for slide deck for me, yeah. So why don't we just open the floor? I've kind of been answering questions as we've been going through, but if there's specific questions that either people want to post on here, or feel free to unmute and we can have a conversation.
Sure, we have a few minutes to maybe 10 minutes that we can spend with questions, but we're going to also do a panel Q&A after my session. I'm only going to spend about 15 minutes talking, so that'll give us about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we can touch on anything at that point also.
Perfect.
So was there some things coming into I just saw a couple messages bounce up there.
Just having a look. So one of my goals is trying to teach sharing links versus attachments. Absolutely. And Microsoft's actually doing a nice job of gently encouraging people. The last while, when you go into Outlook and you say, I want to attach the file, and it already is in SharePoint, it strongly encourages you to attach it as a link. So there's things like that are great. I mean, just having little little learning videos. The learning pathways is great for this kind of stuff. You can actually add your own content in there as well to explain to people the value of things like co-authoring and shared links. I mean, my favorite phrase that I use all the time is a single version of the truth, to say, you know what, as soon as you send attachments out to half a dozen people, you have 6 versions of the document that turn into 36 versions as they start working on them independently. My son's in a new role, and he was chatting with one of the fellow interns where he was working. That person's job was to collect the 12 different versions of documents that got emailed out as attachments and consolidate them back into one document. I mean, that's just craziness. You really want to get to that single version of the truth.
Yeah, that's a nightmare. I'm so tired of. I was really hoping that companies have gotten to the point where that's not an issue anymore, but I still go into companies and still see that same exact scenario.
Now, Susan raised an interesting counterpoint, which is an important one, which is, IT teams have been drilling in anti-phishing, that links and emails are bad. You should never click on them. You got to soften that message a little bit, and it needs to be an education to say, okay, how do I understand whether this link is safe or not? And there's obviously software like Azure Threat Protection that helps with that can deal with anti-phishing. But from an education to staff point of view, they need to understand how to recognize what's potentially a malicious link versus not. And of course, the hackers are getting trickier and trickier all the time and making it appear more and more like it's something real. But understanding that link links to, in our case, envisionit.sharepoint.com, which is our SharePoint Online site, and that's safe. It is a difficult training issue, absolutely. So a point from Cornell about request a Teams form. I actually give a lot of talks on that topic. I mean, we've got a whole open source component that basically builds a SharePoint framework web part that you can request teams and do approvals around it and templating, because I'm a big fan of governance around that, but not heavy-handed governance that locks things down. It's more gentle governance that says, hey, if you want a team, why don't you choose from a template, and we'll preset tabs and get rid of the wiki and put the OneNote in there and things like that you want to have as a standard in your organization. And people like that. They like the fact that things are set up for them and they can follow that pattern. It's not about being restrictive and locking things down. It's about making it easier for the people to follow that pattern. We also work with a third-party company called Orchestry. If you haven't heard of them, just check out orchestry.com. They have a really slick solution around the Teams governance and workspace templating and recursive workflows and that whole side of it as well.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.